Welcome and feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. So, what are we going to be covering today? So, we're going to talk about what age friendly actually refers to. What are we talking about when we say age friendly? Why it's important? What are some of the barriers to engaging older adults as volunteers? And then once we've looked at the barriers, how to actually create that age-friendly place to volunteer. We're going to do a little bit of an advertising of nextstagevolunteering.com. That's our new website that we just released a couple months ago. And then hopefully that'll leave room for questions and answers at the end. Okay, so what is age-friendly exactly? It refers to policies, services, and structures related to physical and social and to the social environment that are designed to help older adults age actively. So an age-friendly community is set up to help older adults live safely, enjoy good health, and stay involved. And when we talk about older adults, we're talking about people over 55. Generally speaking, throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using the word older adult instead of senior because basically older adult is more factual, more objective, more descriptive. Our notion of who is a senior, it's a moving target. And it does tend to be associated a little bit more with someone who's like needing support as opposed to someone who's actually going to be contributing, right? So, but you will notice some of the resources that I reference will still say senior. And one thing I did want to mention before, a couple of other things before we get into it. This PowerPoint is a little old school in the sense that it's kind of text heavy. It's not really pretty, but I just wanted you to be able to use this PowerPoint as actual resource or reference. I've actually put in some hyperlinks for you, so that way I can just send it all off as a PDF for you. And then I will there will be some comments in there that specifically refer to staffed organizations. However, I think pretty much every comment here would be also applicable for those grassroots, all volunteer organizations. So where did age friendly come from? So in 2006, the World Health Organization developed the Global Age-Friendly Cities Project. This project brought together cities from around the world that were interested in supporting healthy aging. Oh, the star poll. Okay. In supporting healthy aging by becoming more age-friendly. These cities gathered information from seniors, senior care providers, and other groups and individuals with an interest in age-friendly communities. This information helped to identify 8 key domains of community life in which communities can become more age-friendly. These domains are as listed, so outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, housing, social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation and employment, which also but most of the points are related to employment. And communication information and community support and health services. In 2007, the Canadian government and provinces created their own recommendations on the World Health Organization's checklists. And today, 10 provinces and 1 territory are promoting age-friendly community initiatives in Canada. This is all from an information on the Government of Canada's website. So I've provided a link to that in the resources section. So why does age-friendly matter? Like, why should we care about this? Well, I'll cover off on 3 points here. Canada's changing demographics, benefits to older adults who volunteer, and conversely, how older adult volunteers benefit communities and nonprofit organizations, right? So here are, I love showing these graphs because really pictures do tell 1,000 words. So on the left, we have age and sex distribution, Canadian age and sex distribution in 1971. Looks like a lovely, almost like a pyramid or Christmas tree shape. And then 50 years later, this is from 2022, we're looking more like a house. And so now, can you imagine what this distribution is going to look like in 25 years from now? We're going to start to look a little bit more like a upside down pyramid. In fact, there is a term called the Super Age Club. So, and we're going to be part of that club within the decade. So, we will join the ranks of super aged countries such as Japan and Germany, where roughly 1 in 5 people are over the age of 65. And in 25 years, as many as 2.5 million Canadians will be over 85, more than double the number in the last census in 2021. So really that those numbers truly underscore the importance of promoting healthy and independent aging in place. I mean, this is 2024 and we already have a crisis in terms of getting space in long-term care. So can you imagine double the numbers in 25 years? Volunteering, as it turns out, is a great aging in place strategy due to the fact that it promotes social, physical, and mental health. And there's tons of research out there now available that shows that volunteering is associated with lower mortality and greater longevity, reduced dementia risk, higher levels of psychological well-being and greater life satisfaction, and fewer depressive symptoms. Imagine if we could package this up as a pill, we would make a lot of money. So, how do older adults benefit organizations? Well, we apparently we really like involving older adults, and there's a good reason why. Now, the red line. This is from 2018, and this is actually from the brand new Canadian Knowledge Hub for Giving and Volunteering. So the volunteer rate is the bars in red, and we can see as people age, that rate tends to go down. But what we also see on the blue is the average hours that people give. It actually goes up as folks age. I also pulled up this is donation rates. And the rates themselves are a little bit more stable once people hit 25. But what happens is average annual donations also go up. So that's really important for us to know for our organizations. And if you sort of anecdotally felt, oh yeah, well, I do want to or I want to bring in more older adult volunteers to volunteer in my organization, you're not the only one. And there was actually some research that I found conducted by MAVA, the Minnesota Association of Volunteer Administration. This was just a couple of years ago. And data suggests that one reason to prioritize, and I'm going to say older adult volunteers, is the relative ease of recruiting and deploying them. So, quite a high percentage of people who did the survey found that this age group tends to be reliable, willing to work on a regular schedule, willing to do what's needed, willing to volunteer more hours per week than younger volunteers, and that they're easier to retain than their younger counterparts. Now, we know it's a win-win. It's a win-win-win, right? It's good for the organization, it's good for the older adult volunteer, and it's good for society as a whole. However, we also know that there are barriers to volunteering for every age group, but there's some specific barriers to older adults, right? And barriers can be one of two kinds. They're either kind of practical slash structural, or they're kind of like more personal and perceived. And there's often overlap between the two. But practical and structural barriers can include things like understanding what volunteering is, right? That's a real cultural barrier. There may be language barriers for newcomers. There are all kinds of financial issues. We're having an affordability crisis now, which means that some folks may actually be delaying retirement, and therefore they actually have less time to volunteer. There are costs associated with volunteering. I mean, volunteering, it's not free to volunteer, right? You might need to use your own car. You might need to use transit. You might need to pay for police records checks. There may be uniforms in some cases, right? And we generally know, most of the research suggests that people who volunteer tend to be middle income and above, right? There could be all kinds of transportation barriers if you live in a community that, maybe you don't have a car and it's very not transit friendly. There could be all kinds of accessibility issues. There could be physical accessibility challenges, but also those digital barriers, right? And then information about volunteering opportunities can be difficult to find, especially with the loss of community newspapers across the country. And the other thing we've started to lose in many cases are the brick and mortar volunteer centers as well. And then, there might be issues around inflexible roles or conditions, and people just like they don't want to take it on. Now, on the other hand, we might have some personal or more perceived barriers, right? So, health challenges is a good example. You might actually be too unhealthy, or you may think that you're not healthy, and you kind of then put off volunteering. You might have caregiver responsibilities. Often, people in their 50s are caring for spouses or parents or grandchildren. It's like a sandwich thing. If you're newly retired, you might want to avoid the time commitment. If you've been retired for a long time, you might have a certain lack of confidence about, getting involved in what you have to offer. Lack of recent prior experience volunteering. So I've actually seen this referred to as voluntary inertia. So if you have volunteered before retirement, you're more likely to volunteer after retirement. But on the flip side, if you don't have a lot of experience volunteering before retirement, you might actually not, there's a good chance you're not going to volunteer once you're retired as well. Not feeling welcomed, a lack of sense of belonging. And again, this is not just older adults. And then not feeling valued and acknowledged, right? And recognized. And again, not just older adults. And then social isolation can be a huge barrier and actually becomes more of a physical barrier. If there's lack of mobility, challenges with sight and hearing, people end up homebound, and that is the health consequences of that are just horrendous. So I would say volunteering is definitely a way of avoiding falling into the pit of social isolation in the first place. And then, so when we look at these kind of like barriers that have existed for a long time, we can now sort of see that what COVID did is it started off as a structural barrier that eventually ended up morphing into a perceived barrier, right? So, in the beginning, we were stuck at home. We were forced to stay at home. And over time, I think what happens is that people's lifestyles change, and also there may be more anxiety around their health issues, about being safe, in congregate settings or, crowded settings. And then you build up that inertia to stay home, and you have to now overcome it in order to volunteer again. So really, I think the onus on us is now really to start promoting those benefits, how volunteering truly benefits older adults. So I'm now going to move into how to make your organization more of an age-friendly place to volunteer. And I kind of looked at three big areas. So the first two I'm kind of going to touch on, but really I want to spend more of my time on those volunteer engagement practices. But so we're going to look at the physical workspace if you engage your volunteers on site. Then we want to look at the online space. So whether it's your website or it's any kind of like digital content that your older adults interact with, and it could even be like a PDF of a handbook that you create. So we're going to talk just briefly about that, and then we're going to get into the volunteer engagement practices. So what I found as I was preparing this presentation was this idea of age-friendly businesses. And Age-Friendly Businesses BC has this wonderful checklist that's all about making your business age-friendly. And a lot of this would be really nicely applicable to us. Okay, so, and these are just a few of these little key points to look at, like, and I will say a lot of this does overlap with AODA, but this checklist in particular was just very kind of concrete for me. It was very detailed. So looking at your outside spaces and how easy is it for someone with maybe some mobility issues to walk into your site. Is the inside space, can people navigate it without any obstructions and distractions? And making sure that location of elevators, washrooms, all those amenities is clearly posted. You've got a site layout map. Um, Premises are well and evenly lit, and signage has legible fonts and good contrast, so black on white. And then this actual checklist goes into all kinds of customer service issues as well. So again, all very applicable to engaging volunteers. Now, in terms of the digital stuff, and this found a really good resource called Making Your Website Senior Friendly by the National Institute of Aging from the US. It's got some really, again, another great checklist of things to use to kind of evaluate all your kind of like digital content, right? So even in terms of the way you're writing, like making sure that you put key messages first, that you limit the number of points and you keep paragraphs short and use numbers and bullets. And really, like, in this day and age, all of us like our content written this way because we're overloaded with information. So you want to write in an active voice. So that is like example, we need to complete ABC instead of saying ABC needs to be completed. um, you use second person. So especially on your volunteer web page, make sure that you're actually talking to the person directly, saying you are important to us as opposed to volunteers are really important to us. Um, write in the positive. Use remember to instead of don't forget to. And the reason for this is because when you use the positive, you're kind of explaining the outcome you want to see. But don't forget kind of implies that the other person will forget. So it's just try to use that positive tone. Um, Use 12 or 14 point sans serif font, such as Arial, Tahoma, or Verdana. So in this presentation in body, I did use Verdana. Avoid italics. I didn't quite do that before, but italics are generally harder to read. Typeface should be medium or bold and not like really thin and light. A left justification is easier to read than centered or full justification, straight lines on both sides. And then you always want to make sure you've got nice high contrast of font and background. So aim for a black type on white background. Never like do like, as an example, blue font on a light blue background. It's harder to read. And I do often like, when I visit websites, I'm pretty sure, like once you become aware of that contrast issue, you really become aware of like what an issue it is. We're not very careful with contrast. And then ideally, your website font can be increased. We do on Volunteer Success, we use a widget called Userway, and it's free. So you need someone to actually upload your website. So now, in terms of looking at your volunteer engagement practices, I always start with the Canadian Code for Volunteer Involvement, or actually I put engagement, but it's involvement. Sorry about that. I find that this is such a great list of best practices, and I always go back to it. So some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not, but it's always good if you are familiar with it that we kind of do a little refresher. And then I'm going to go into some of the stages of some of the traditional stages of the volunteer engagement cycle. And I'm not going to go into it in detail. I just want to kind of highlight some tips that are helpful specifically for older adult volunteers. If you do want some more sort of basic information about what is the volunteer engagement cycle and what do you need to do, please message me, email me, and I'm happy to send you some more resources. So the Canadian Code for Volunteer Involvement is a great place to start when looking at best practices for engaging all volunteers, but even more so for older adults, right? The code consists of values, guiding principles, and standards. And if you go onto this page that I've hyperlinked there's this great tool called Putting the Code into Action. And for every single standard, it's going to have a series of checklists for you to go to. Now, just to say, not like it's I don't think there'd be an organization in the world that could check off every box on that checklist. But what it is like, standards that you can kind of work towards, right? So whenever you're kind of questioning or wondering about something, is this the right thing to do? Check out the CCVI. So, and one of the things I just wanted to again kind of highlight, the CCVI really does talk about the impact that volunteering has on Canadian society, communities, organizations, and individuals. And it specifically says that volunteer involvement is supposed to be personal, right? It does promote a sense of belonging and general well being, and it provides the opportunity for individuals to engage according to their personal preferences, interests, and skills and motivations. So, really, what we're talking about here is that we're always balancing the needs of the organization and the needs of the individual. Um, every time it can't be all about the organization or all about the volunteer. It's got to be both, right? In fact, one of the guiding principles of volunteer involvement is that the relationship between the two has to be reciprocal, right? It has to benefit both. So, this is just a great starting point for us when we now kind of look at building out or improving our volunteer program and involving older adults in particular. So the planning for volunteer engagement, very important. Traditionally, what we'd be looking at here is we're doing an organizational needs assessment. We'd be kind of figuring out where we might be able to involve volunteers to better provide service. We'd be looking at building out the infrastructure, kind of like the whole process, all the policies. So but here, what I'd also like to add on, layer on, is how can we address some of those barriers to involvement that we talked about before, especially the structural and practical ones, right? Now we know that digital barriers are a big issue. So how can we connect those older adults to digital training resources in your community? For instance, our library systems across the country really are known as leaders in digital literacy training. So, can we connect our older adult volunteers or volunteer seeking individuals to the library if they're like struggling a little bit with kind of that digital connection, right? Um, can you lend them devices or can you kind of give them support about from in terms of accessing devices? There are now some libraries that will help provide devices for older adults. And we also I will send this to you later, but in next stage volunteering, we do actually have some information on other groups that also provide um, digital training for older adults as well. And then in terms of budgeting, again, we know that volunteering has costs for volunteers, right? So can we build this in when we're applying for funding for some of our programs and we have volunteers that support those programs? Can we put in into the budgeting either transit fare for folks who, might need that for the police records checks, for maybe mileage if it's suitable, any other reasonable expenses. And maybe even if you can't do that. Maybe you can figure out how you can facilitate carpooling. And the nice thing with this is then you have an opportunity for kind of more social interaction as well. No, I would caution against kind of offering stipends or anything like that. As soon as we get into paying people to volunteer, then we're not really volunteering, and then it gets us into a very kind of gray area where um, employment standards is involved. So we don't want to go that way. Definitely, if you want to give gifts or one-time honorariums, that's fine, but don't nothing regular. Um, risk management is something else to look at, especially around communicating safety, offering training. Um, and then just a little sidebar there, asking yourself, figuring out, does everybody actually need vulnerable sector screening? Because we know this is a huge cost, as well as like a yet another hoop that people have to jump through. So I'm not going to talk a lot about vulnerable sector screening here, police records checks. we can certainly, if there's time, we can address it in questions afterwards. And I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record here, but we want to try to involve older adults in the planning process as much as possible, because they will likely have a lot to say. So, in terms of role design, I'm going to dip back into the Canadian Code of Volunteer Involvement. Again, this is for those of us working in the field, this is kind of like, foundational, but just in case there are folks on this call who maybe aren't as experienced. So, what we really want volunteer roles that contribute to the mission or the purpose of the organization involve volunteers in meaningful ways that reflect their skills, interests, and experience of the individual. So volunteer roles should have written descriptions that include duties, responsibilities, skills, abilities, and the time required. So just like a job description, but we don't want to call it a job description because it's not a job, right? So it's either a position description or role description. So when we're looking at the role design, we're going to try to balance the organizational requirements with accessibility and comfort, right? So we're going to look at the role, figure out, can we make it a little bit less physically demanding? Can we put do they really need to stand the whole time? Can we give them a bar stool? Can we give them anti-fatigue mats? Can we provide any kind of accommodations for low vision or other disabilities? Can we have a buddy system? Can you bring a friend for whatever kind of support you need? How can you increase flexibility in terms of scheduling and where and how the work is done? Can we make it more virtual or phone based? I'm thinking about those opportunities involve visiting people in their homes, for instance. Can we offer vacation breaks? Can we provide flexibility around some caregiving responsibilities, right? Can we offer self-scheduling? And a lot of volunteer management platforms, software now offers, like if it's cloud-based, you're going to be able to offer self-scheduling. Just quite nice. Once people get used to it, it's pretty easy to use. Can this be a group opportunity for a group of friends? I mean, it's funny, like older adults also feel more comfortable walking into a new environment with a friend, right? Or just like even like, high school students would often do a volunteer role, but more likely to do one with a friend. So can we position a group opportunity? Can we position an opportunity for one person as a group opportunity? Um, so just to make it more kind of comfortable walking into a new environment. And again, consult with your existing older adults to see what they think and how they think the role can be adapted. So marketing and recruitment, this is big for me. So what I'd encourage you here is to use as many marketing channels as possible, including print. To go old school here. For Next Stage Volunteering, for instance, we've been sending out posters to libraries across the province, and because they're happy to take them. So you can take a page from some employers who are offering incentives to their own employees who refer people to jobs. Maybe you can have gifts or draws, for a gift for each word of mouth referral that a volunteer brings. Maybe think about hosting open houses to learn about volunteering, and existing volunteers can then share their own experience, right? And making sure that you're looking at your website and making sure your promotional materials all have images of older adult volunteers. Provide testimonials, and that speak to the impact on the missions, but also the impact that volunteering has on themselves as well. And this is a big one, making sure you have an email address and a phone number if possible on your web page, the volunteer web page, for questions, right? Like more than just the info at email. If you have like a volunteer at email, make sure that's there, and that you actually respond to emails. That's really, really important. And then perhaps you could look at addressing some of those perceived barriers commitment on an FAQ page. People can ask, can I take a vacation, or can I take breaks, or why does your training have to be 6 months long, or whatever, answer the questions that people will have. And then a big one is to promote volunteering as a healthy aging strategy, and maybe link some articles, and um, uh, we can certainly provide. I've been collecting those, and we've been putting them into Next Stage Volunteering. So grab them and then stick them onto your volunteer webpage. Selection, screening, and onboarding. So again, try to involve older adults in this process, and try to figure out how you can reduce those barriers if at all possible. Can you support them through the application process? Maybe fill in online application with them in person or through a Zoom call. Do you go back to paper forms? Maybe, I don't know. And then, we have talked about, okay, you need an email address these days to volunteer. And I'm not going to tell you that, you shouldn't do that. Um, but what I will say is really promote the benefits of inclusion by getting an email address, right? So, and honestly, I think this is going to be less and less of an issue as we kind of like as our population continues to age. People in their 50s are all very likely to have email addresses now. So, and then again, making sure that you're reading, especially like volunteer handbooks. They're all kind of larger font, easy to read. So, I just want to talk in general here a little bit about retention. So retention isn't one activity, it's really like a outcome of good practice, right? So, and here's how I see it. So you've planned a party, you've created your guest list, you've invited your guests, and now you've welcomed them in, so they're in the house. Um, Now the question becomes, what kind of atmosphere are you creating that is going to encourage those guests to stay to the end of the party and tell everybody what a great time you had or they had? So really, to me, it's about creating that sense of belonging, right? And fun. Belonging and fun. So what I've listed here really is a series of tips that are really applicable to all volunteers. So, and this is number one, you have to make all volunteers feel welcomed and acknowledged by all staff every day. You want to get to know their stories, take an interest in them as a whole human being. And the older someone is, the more stories they're going to have to tell, right? You're going to make sure you're giving them lots of communication, e-blasts, newsletters, individual emails were required, print copies were appropriate, like maybe newsletters. You're going to treat those volunteers like time donors, right? And provide them with the same annual and impact reports that financial donors get. Offer lots of recognition and social events, educational events for volunteers, and we can combine them with staff events as well, really to create that sense of team. And then obviously offer opportunities for feedback, address errors and performance issues professionally and with courtesy. So here I want to move into talking a little bit about ageism in the workplace, because really a truly age-friendly place to volunteer is one where both staff and volunteers represent a wide age range. Because, you know, a generationally mixed workplace is inviting to everybody. You never want to feel like you're the oldest person in that party, but you don't want to necessarily feel like the youngest one either, right? Um, but unfortunately, I think a lot of workplaces are lagging behind in terms of who they're hiring, right? A Canadian survey found 63% of older adults surveyed felt that they'd been treated unfairly based on their age. Younger people, healthcare professionals, government policies, and employers were the most identified sources of age discrimination. And according to a 2022 survey by the American Association of Retired Persons, 93% of older employees say they've seen or experienced age discrimination in the workplace. And according to that same organization, ageism is the last acceptable ism. So what can we do to kind of address this make that ism unacceptable in the workplace, right? We need older workers to stay in the workforce longer. Um, Workers stabilized teams have strong skills working with all generations. This is according to the CEO of CanAge. And in fact, I've actually seen research that suggests that the earlier people retire, the higher the risk of dementia. So it really does point to the need that to actually start planning for volunteer work before we actually retire. It should be like our priority, really. Um, so we do all to say that, part of this whole retention question then really is not just about the volunteers, but it's also about the staff who are in the organization themselves. So what can we do about that? So we need to start having those conversations about ageism, right? Especially given that kind of super age club that we're like soon going to be entering into, right? We have to define what ageism is and address it and make sure it's part of the organizational DEI policy. We want to start creating mentor roles for both older workers and volunteers, right? And start doing a lot of training of staff and employees and volunteers on working with people with disabilities and dementia. And then again, training your staff to be friendly and patient with all volunteers and avoid some of those condescending behaviors about speaking too loudly or, calling someone dear or whatever. So just some ideas. This isn't necessarily up to you. This is really about us as an organization, kind of putting the mirror on ourselves and looking at what we look like to an older adult volunteer maybe coming into this organization. So here's our little advertising minute here. So this is our response to kind of like older adult volunteering. So what we've built here with funding from both federal as well as provincial level um, is a website that's 100% targeted towards older adults. It is filled with information about volunteering. So how to find an opportunity, how to figure out what you want to do, what questions you want to ask. There are some good general resources, and big thing is about the benefits of volunteering. Yeah, I should say that at the beginning. How it actually helps you age well. And then what it also does, it links to our main website, Volunteer Success. So it kind of pulls any opportunity that's flagged with the, suitable for 55 plus. And so people can not only learn about volunteering, but they can also find it here as well. It's supposed to be like a one-stop shop. And we've been doing a lot of work in the last few months to really promote this as broadly as possible. So, what we're going to recommend is that you, if you don't have an account with us, definitely get an account and start posting your opportunities. And if you do have an account, log in. Make sure that your organizational profile is complete, that you've added in the logo. Make sure that your opportunities are all currently published, they're all live. Make sure that the final sort of box as you're posting an opportunity is like there's one suitable for high school students and the other one is suitable for adults 55 plus. So make sure that's checked. And then if you need any help at all, please reach out to me. I'm going to send you my email address if you don't have it. So that wraps me up. That's exactly, I wanted it to last 45 minutes, so that was great. So I'm actually going to stop sharing now. The next couple of slides I have, as I said, they're just like resources for you guys. So I'm going to stop sharing here and I'm going to open the door. And there's only 39 of us. So if you do want to just, let's see, LaShonda said she had some questions, right? Did anything come up? How about introducing office hours for volunteers who require tech support and can work with a volunteer-based IT team in the volunteer office? Well, yeah, absolutely. Why not? not. Like, I think that's a great idea, Saskia. I mean, anything we can do to like support older adult volunteers and kind of overcoming those digital barriers, I think great. And if anybody does introduce something like that, let's write up an article about it and share it because we really, again, we really want to promote all these great practices that keep that help older adult volunteers get involved in our communities. Okay, anybody else have any questions? I'm just going to change my view here so I can see everybody properly. Okay. There, gallery mode, perfect. Does anybody have any comments or questions at all or ideas that this might have triggered for you? Or tell me about your experiences lately. How are you finding it? How's it going with the recruitment of older adults? Carrie, go for it.
So I guess one of the things that I have, it's more of a question, and it goes back to the conversation around the intergenerational volunteer programs. And one of the things that we struggle with is we do have a large population of older adult volunteers that volunteer in our organization, which is fantastic. What I'm finding is that they don't have a lot of tolerance for working with the younger volunteers. And
Hmm.
so there
Mhm.
is that clash between the generations because the
Yep.
older adults, as you said, they are highly dependable, they are reliable, they come in when they say they're going to commit to coming in. And
Right.
the new generation of volunteers coming in is very different in their mindset. They are looking for something that's more flexible, that doesn't require quite the same level of commitment, that kind of thing. And I guess what I'm struggling with is how do you marry those two together and have everybody on the same page, and make it a cohesive working environment? Because that's one of the things that I'm seeing. You talked a little bit at the end about mentorship.
Yep.
And even trying to get some of our older adult volunteers to mentor some of the new ones, I see the frustrations that are there, and I wonder if
Right.
anybody has any suggestions about things that have worked really well for them.
That's great. It sounds to me like, yeah, we definitely need to offer some more training. And this has never occurred to me, so I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, Carrie. Is like the training maybe needs to be on how older volunteers work with the younger volunteers, right? And kind of like trying to break down some of the like there are some perceptual barriers here in terms of how both sides see each other, right? Saskia?
Yeah, Carrie, I hear you. I think we experience similar challenges at times, and I think it's especially that piece around respect for each other that can be quite
Right.
challenging, especially when like cell phones are pervasive everywhere, and so if some of the uh, more mature, older volunteers are active and they constantly see the younger generation on their phones and not interacting with the public or what have you, it creates that tension on occasion. But we also see a lot of really positive
Yeah.
outcomes where they work together, where they naturally gravitate to each other and have an exchange of stories happening and learn from each other. It's also that leadership piece that can be challenging when we have want to give a younger person the opportunity to build leadership skills and give them a team leader role, and they are not being respected by someone who has been with the organization for 10, 15 years or longer.
Right.
They get a lot of pushback as well on
Yeah.
that front.
Yeah, and it really does speak to the issue around ageism being quite pervasive. We're not even recognizing it, all the different manifestations that it takes, right? So there really is a lot of like we have to all kind of teach ourselves about recognizing it and stopping it in its tracks. So it might mean not only teaching younger people how to be less ageist, but it sounds like older people also need to be less ageist around, younger people. Let's see. I see that there was another, let me just follow up here with the chat. There we go. So Rachel said, very challenging. The Ontario Hospital Association introduced a new requirement for volunteers in hospitals to provide their immunization records. Some of them don't have the records and would have to get a blood test. This adds time to the process, potentially additional costs and more delays if they have to get a booster shot. Yeah, I'm sure that's a huge problem for the hospital sector. Yeah, and I agree. It'll volunteer appreciation events are beneficial towards social mingling. Yeah, I think, I mean, we in the community sector, we really have that opportunity to provide those intergenerational spaces that a lot of like other places don't offer. And I think that's a really important point. Anybody else have any comments or questions? There's actually,
I
yeah, go for
can,
it.
yeah. So, Linda Graff, who I don't know if any of you are familiar with her.
Yes.
I think she's just absolutely the most amazing person for learning about volunteerism. She basically said that you have to look at things through the lens of your audience. So for seniors, their focus for volunteering.
I'm going to stop you there. Go for it.
Sorry, the seniors' focus for volunteering is for the corporation, for the organization. For the next generation that came after that, their focus is on the people that they work with, how it's going to work for everybody around them. The generation after that, they're the generation of what's in it for me, how is this going to forward me in my career? And the generation after that, their focus is how is this going to affect everybody globally? So when you're focusing on those things, the lens of the people that you're working with, you can actually find things that you're going to find a crossover in those things that are going to make it easy for intergenerational to work together. One of the greatest pictures I saw on online one time was an intergenerational volunteering position where they gave T-shirts to the seniors and the youth. And the seniors t-shirt said, listen to the youth, they have things you can learn from them. And the youth t-shirt said, listen to the seniors, they have things you can learn from them. And when they actually both see that there's value in the other person, it can make them more open to what they're doing themselves. Quite often when a volunteer comes in, I also worked with newcomers to Canada. Quite often when a volunteer comes in, their focus is on what can I give to this person, and quite often when they walk away from it afterwards, they find out that they're getting things from that person. So if you can work what you are presenting to the person as the position that they are, it's a give and take, you're going to get more value out of that.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for that. I love those t-shirts. Although I'd substitute the word older adult for senior.
There you go.
I was told to use the words because on our advisory committee, we do have someone who's a former director of an age-friendly initiative in Halton region, and she said to me right from the get-go, don't use the word senior. So I have completely stripped that word from my vocabulary, especially now that I am over 55. I'm like, I'm not a senior, no way.
It's funny you would mention that because when you think, oh wow, I'm an older adult now, I don't feel like it, it's just like, when did that happen? I know I get a discount at the store now on Wednesdays, but come on,
Well, that's what I mean. Like the idea of who is a senior, it is shifting, right? So, Judy, what you were saying about, how you characterize all these different generations, I think it just keeps changing all the time, right? So, yeah, like, it used to be, I think a generation ago, someone who was a senior was over 65, and now I feel like it's over 80. I think you have to be over 80 to be a senior, right? So, I think that's a healthy thing because there's also I've also read research that if you have certain preconceived notions of what a senior is, you're more likely it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. and then your actual health outcomes, go down the toilet as well. So we want to create a model of aging that isn't about becoming more frail and more dependent. We actually need to start creating more models in our head around aging as being kind of like healthy and independent and vibrant. And I think honestly, volunteering is a big part of that. So that's why I say it really needs to be the number one plan people have. If they're going to retire, they need to figure out what kind of volunteer work they're going to do once they do retire.
Just a quick, I saw a joke that basically said, the older I get, the older the age of being a senior becomes.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, absolutely. I got to find those quotes and add them to my presentation. So thank you so much. Is there anybody else? Oh, there's a great comment here. One of my challenges is trying to engage volunteers who are willing to participate in virtual phone volunteering, but are isolated themselves or shut in and have infrequent interaction with someone who can support them in person to complete tasks like, oh, wow. Yeah, and that's we did mention about social isolation. So since we sort of got this grant from the Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility, I've learned so much about the detrimental impact of social isolation. And it's quite bad. So we really need to try and try to move all that stuff. Like we need to try and like prevent people from actually ending up in that pit, because once you become socially isolated, it gets harder and harder to climb out of it. So yeah, I think that's great that you're trying to do that for sure. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate your time. Like I said, I hope that was helpful. If you think of any other things that might be useful to address in the presentation, I love it when I have one presentation that I keep kind of revising and updating and improving. So if you have any other questions or comments or suggestions, please send them my way. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll be sending you the slide deck early next week and the recording.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.